This is our third offline hearing. So the purpose is to review the proposals that will just not have time to be heard in the main committees. They still have value to moving our code towards Denver's goals. So these are optional for all committee members. So thank you for those that are joining today. We really appreciate your time. We will be posting agendas and recordings and minutes from these to the website. So if you can't make it or you want to know if what's coming up on the agendas, if it makes sense for you to join, those will be posted on our code adoption website. And today we'll be focusing on commercial. So we have John with Noresco joining us to help walk us through the proposals and answer any questions that we might have. The agenda is also in our meeting invite, so we can reference that as we're going through this. I'll be screen sharing. These are just less formal meetings. So the proponent, so in this case today, John, will be presenting the proposals, and then we'll just be having a live discussion and updating the proposals on the screen, getting to a consensus before moving on to the next proposal. And just to note too that proposals that are recommended to the City Council during these offline hearings will be distinguished differently from those that were voted on from the larger committee hearings, from the formal hearings. I think that's about it. Christy, is there anything you wanted to add?
You covered it.
Great. And I got a message from Eric that he's joining shortly. So John, and Tom, you have a hand up?
Just a quick note, I think that it's super redundant to say this, but just to make sure everyone's aware that we're recording and transcribing these meetings. So FYI.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So I'm going to start screen sharing now. John, I'll hand it off to you as we go through these proposals, and I'll just be making modifications as we're discussing them before, coming to a consensus between all of us.
Great, thank you. Everyone, my name is John Art with Noresco, working with the City of Denver on these proposals. Let me know if I have audio problems. I have a dog in the other room in the background. Hopefully it's not too much of a nuisance. His bark is coming through the door, so I don't want to have to let him outside, even though it's nice weather here. So please let me know if that's too much of a nuisance. The first proposal is to, this one's fairly straightforward, is to basically expand the scope of where airside economizers are required for HVAC systems. So the proposal here is to expand the requirement for economizers from the current level or minimum threshold, which is 54,000 BTUs per hour or 4.5 tons, down to 33,000, which is just under 3 tons. So this would effectively, for commercial buildings, cover or bring in systems that have rated capacities of 3 and 4 tons into this requirement. This is kind of in parallel with the requirement that's been brought into other jurisdictions. The obvious benefits are, for buildings, even in Denver's climate, where there's significant periods of much too cold conditions to economize in the winter and somewhat hot conditions at times in the summer, there's a significant opportunity to economize and save energy by using outside air for cooling. This is fairly standard system option for systems. For systems with one cooling stage, I've seen it done multiple ways as far as having both integrated and non-integrated economizers with modern controls. Even with a single cooling stage, typically these systems can operate in the integrated mode, which means that the economizer would work in conjunction with compressor cooling. The systems have controls to lock out the cooling when needed. So there's some exceptions here. We added or we have listed a exception for water cooled units with a capacity less than 54 kBTUs that aren't used in systems where heating and loads are transferred to the building. So this would be example like a water source heat pump system where you typically not using the system for ventilation as well. That's a pretty quick summary of this one. This one's not too complicated, at least in terms of intent. So I wanted to see with that if there are any questions. Some of the other ones are a little bit more involved, so I want to make sure, I don't want to shortchange this one, but I want to make sure there's time for discussion of some of the other units, other measures, excuse me. Are there any questions, comments, concerns?
Go ahead, Elizabeth. We can just jump in.
Yeah, I don't know if we're doing the hand raising thing today. Yeah, John, is this intended to be a mandatory or a prescriptive requirement?
This would be prescriptive. So there should be. I'll have to check on the language. It's been a while since I've looked at the precise language here when it was developed. But the idea is that there would be available trade-offs for this type of measure.
And John, I was hoping we could cover the DGC changes at the same time too, so we can just have those conversations together. Is there anything you wanted to go into on the Denver Green Code side?
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, I think that the Denver Green Code is the idea is mainly to update the requirements to be consistent with the proposed change in the IECC. So there isn't really anything that I recall that was done additionally for the DGC on top of the IECC change.
I have another question, John. Do you have studies or something that shows that there's actually savings for these small capacity systems? I mean, like if I'm modeling this in a split system without an economizer, it's always going to be more energy efficient than a rooftop unit with an economizer of the same capacity when we get to these smaller systems. I mean, I can't unless there's I don't know. I mean, what kind of documentation do you have?
Well, so that's a good comment. So I mean, a split system, certainly there's a lot of small, when you start to get down to this size capacity, there's a lot of split systems available, some of which have higher cooling efficiency. So we're not, looking, and not only are we not looking to increase the required efficiency, we can't because of federal preemption typically. So there are cases for some of these systems where a split system may be a better choice for that building, that specific design, especially if the ventilation requirements are consistent and not too great. This is really comparing a unitary system, so the one that provides heating, cooling, and ventilation, with one that doesn't have an economizer with one that does. So as far as the other part of your question, as far as studies showing savings, now some of this is based off of requirements or developed for supporting the state of California. Now, before you cringe, I know the climates are somewhat dramatically different. We don't have any definitive studies, I guess, as far as the magnitude of energy savings for this particular climate, and it's certainly going to vary with the building, the operating schedules, as well as the internal gains itself. So
is the intent to apply this to only package systems? Because if I compare a rooftop unit with an economizer, a 3-ton rooftop unit with an economizer, the 3-ton split system is more energy efficient because of the fan energy, not because of the cooling efficiency. So there would not be savings in requiring someone to go to a rooftop unit with an economizer at this level. I can't even really justify it at 4.5 tons. But this,
Right.
there would not. So is it the intent that this is just to apply to package systems?
Yes.
Or are
it
you
is.
trying to convert split systems to package systems?
No, not at all. And I think a lot of the smaller buildings, it will make more sense to use a split system. So maybe that's a good point of clarification. Yeah, I work with a lot of, medium, even big box retail. Some of them use package rooftop units, even as low as 3 tons, 4 tons, depending upon how they zone the building. But no, this shouldn't apply to split systems, and it's not intended to require or incentivize, projects from switching from a split system to a package system. So that should always be an option.
So could you add then an exception for split systems that have a cooling capacity of less than the 54,000 BTUH? So that would let those smaller split systems basically stay as is. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes and yes. I think it's a good exception to be added. So the language here does cover some systems like VRF, water source heat pump, that will typically often not have ventilation as part of that system to begin with. But so the split system sort of falls into that category, but regardless of how it's classified, I think that's a good addition.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment of the package systems in that 310. Yeah, that's an easy one. That's low hanging fruit. But I wouldn't want our projects with the little 3-ton splits to say, oh, now I got to go to a rooftop unit, because it'll actually be an energy increase.
So I'd like to capture what we've been discussing right now. Elizabeth, do you mind repeating that language you'd like to see, and then we can adjust if needed?
Let's see. What's the codified language, John? Would we say, I don't know that split system is a code term, but would we say non-packaged systems? I don't know. What's the mechanical code language there?
Well, I guess we could say
systems with remote cooling. I don't know.
Unitary, I'm gonna say maybe either unitary systems or DX systems without a ventilation source. Would that cover it?
Well, they'll still have a ventilation source. Like if I've got, a little office that has a little furnace in it, it's still bringing in outside air. It's just got a remote condenser. And it doesn't have and it's really it's the split, I guess we would say, what's the right way? Or you could just say systems with remote cooling, less than 54,000 BTUH. There might be a better way. Maybe you can. I think that's the intent anyway.
Yeah, or something like, I don't know if split systems is code language also, but we could say something like systems that do not have the condensing unit within the system, something of that effect. That's a little wordy.
Yeah, maybe you can find pretty words there, but I think that's the intent.
This with remote cooling portion.
How about systems that do not have integrated cooling, packaged cooling?
Chuck, do you have some advice on language here?
Yeah,
it's funny because John and Elizabeth are both listing a bunch of different terms, and they're all accurate.
I can't. I'm not sure what the code says.
Well, yeah.
What are the code words?
I mean, I think unitary systems typically would include the ones we do not want to exempt. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, unitary, I consider as a package system, right?
Yep.
right,
Absolutely.
anything but that.
Non-unitary, but I don't think unitary is in the. Well, hang on, I'm going to search my code book here, see what I can find. Might have to check the IMC. I don't know that one very well. Yeah, we might have to come back to the right words, but I think maybe for now you can just say non-packaged systems or something like that.
Specs for these two, Elizabeth. See if I can track one down.
Might have to look in the IMC for the right words there.
So does this language that we're looking at generally capture the intent of what we're all discussing, and then we can modify that?
I think we would say non-packaged systems with cooling capacity less than 54,000. Right? Does that sound right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that lets those little splits have an out, but brings in the those 3 and 4 ton RTUs.
Well, I'm just curious because I mean we created a whole new exception for these non-packaged split systems, where just base code number 2, or the proposal is to reduce it down to 33,000 BTU, which is intended for just rooftop units, if I'm or package system, where the base code includes both. Is there any way we can just clarify it within number 2 instead of creating an exception? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know what the
I'm
best
not
way
sure.
to do
I
that
think
is.
I think you want to. It sounds like John, you want to encompass the the 3 ton rooftop units, but exclude the 3 ton split. So there's a little bit of a crossover. The way that the current code is written, like I could build a building with a 6 ton split, but it's prescriptive. And if you're following the prescriptive code, you would not be able to do that. So I don't think we want to allow an exception for, say, a 6 ton split system, right? Because that's kind of the tipping point.
Yep.
But I think it makes sense to allow the exception for the 3 ton split. So I think the exception is the right place, because you wouldn't want to accept a larger split system.
Well, but I mean, like
Right?
number two sets a limit. Like the idea is you set a limit for each when it's required. So individual fan systems with a rated cooling capacity greater than or equal to 33,000 BTU for rooftop units or package systems.
But it's a package rating, not a package system. So that applies to split systems as well, the way that it's written.
Yeah.
So like my split systems, they still have a overreaching, system capacity. And they would still fall within that language. And I don't think you'd want to change the language in number 2 there. Otherwise, you might be opening the door to, that 6-ton split system not having to have an economizer.
True. And total capacity. And then, so just being devil's advocate, if there was a building that designed a ton of mini or small split systems that exceeded the 300,000 BTU, we're not exempting that, are we? By creating this exception?
No, I don't think so, because then there's still the overreaching code where once your whole building exceeds a certain cooling capacity, then you also trigger the economizer requirement. So this would be like, little buildings that would fall beneath both, like a little office or, a little fitness center or something that, and I'm forgetting what the whole building, is it 40 tons? I can't remember, but you wouldn't be able to, like your supermarket wouldn't be able to have 40 different split systems and not trigger the economizer thing.
No.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just in number 2, any building with a total of 300,000 BTU of cooling is going to require economizer.
Yeah, with number 3 there, I think you got that covered.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because it went down. The old code it was 300,000. I think now 2021 it's 270,000. Is that right? That changed, didn't it? Oh, I can't remember.
Double checking right now.
Too many
So,
codes.
It looks, I haven't changed that portion. It looks like the 270 applies to the group R occupancy and the 300,000. I'm not sure why I need for different requirement. That's such a slight difference for the different occupancy, but the 300 kBTUs is for, which is 25 tons total, is for commercial.
Yep.
Are there other modifications we'd like to see on this proposal?
Well, I had some, if we're okay with that part, I'm moving on to section C403.5.1. There's a lot of added language and just wanted to discuss that. So there's like 2.2 brings in ASHRAE standard 90.1, section 6.5.3.1, which I believe is intended to be 6.5.1.3. I think the last 2 numbers got transposed. But looking at the language here, it appears to be very similar in nature to what is already captured in C403.5.1. And I was just wanting further clarification on why this added language directly from ASHRAE was needed over the base code language. And there's also a reference to an ASHRAE table here. And I didn't know if we needed to bring that table into this proposal as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. This may be more maybe not quite redundant, but it might be just more elaboration of the existing requirements. So if I would have to check if IECC already has a fair definition of what an integrated economizer control is, then some of this might not be needed.
Yeah, like number 1 is very consistent with letter A, for example. Controls, capacity interlocked. And then number 2 is very similar to B, but just the 75,000 versus 65,000. And then number 3 is identical, just referencing a different table.
Yeah, I believe some of this may be maybe a little bit just reinforcing language, and I'm not looking at it now. I'm not sure how much additionally it adds beyond the other requirements.
Because even the tables are identical out of the table quoted there, and the table in the base IECC is the same.
Hmm. Yeah, I think some of this could be likely cleaned up or even removed without losing the intent. I guess it was, I think we added it just to give extra clarity, but if it's something that's providing some redundancy, then we could potentially remove the area under 2.2. And you know, the paragraphs there. I mean, it talks about control. You can have control for some of these systems that they either control you know, control the staging based on the space temperature, or they control modulate the airflow directly. But this doesn't seem, some of this doesn't seem fully required to, you know, relevant to the economizer language.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems very, very consistent with section C403.5.1. Like, it almost appears the IECC almost adopted exactly what's in ASHRAE, and this is changing it a little bit. The only difference I can see really is the number 2. ASHRAE has 65,000 here, and here we have the IECC has 75,000.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, the language is very consistent.
Does it make sense to see how we all feel about moving this one forward, and then with the intent that John would clean up this language or remove redundant language to proceed? Or do we want some more discussion on these?
Yeah, I mean, we could discuss how we want to move forward. Honestly, I think all this language could, for the most part, be removed, and then maybe just update the value. And if we want to be consistent with ASHRAE, just update the value in number 2 to 65,000. But there may be more there. Like 2.1 adds an additional requirement, so maybe keep that. But yeah, I'd be okay moving it forward with the understanding John's gonna clean it up.
Yeah, I think this might warrant a little cleanup.
Okay. Is there anyone that disagrees with moving this one forward with the understanding that John will clean up this language?
Do we get a chance to look at it again?
We can bring that back if that's something you want to see, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I always think it's worth just having eyes on the final version just in case.
Agreed.
Sounds good. All right, well, let's move on unless there's anything else we wanted to touch on, but the next one is,
Well, hold on, I want to add
Oh.
one thing.
Yeah,
So
sure.
adding this, we're going to need to have ComCheck modified, correct? To include these new limits into the mechanical ComCheck. So this is going to require PNL to, or whoever, to update the mechanical ComCheck moving forward. I think that's just something we should consider as well. Like that's an added ask that we're going to have it updated and then reviewed and etc. But just something that I think should be acknowledged when proposal requires additional efforts to be able to be enforced.
Yeah,
Good
and
point.
we should discuss the timing on that because typically it's not a real fast turnaround in updating and then checking that. And if we have something that's proposed to go into effect, January 2023, and ComCheck isn't ready, then we've got regulations that folks don't have the tool to design for.
So I guess the big question is there enough value added that it's worth the extra effort to have mechanical ComCheck upgraded? I mean, I hate to put it like that, but does this move?
If there's any other proposals that would require it to be upgraded as well.
Well, the next one on our list is definitely one.
Right. So I mean, if we've got a batch, then I think it's more a matter of being aware of the timing.
Well, I think a lot of them are going to, because a lot of even the points proposals that's prescriptive, and so the points are going to need to be, that's a complete edit, or that's a complete add to ComCheck. So yeah, we're definitely going to have we're definitely going to need to have ComChecks updated for the prescriptive path.
Yeah, that's probably a global problem for all of this. I don't know that it necessarily has to influence one amendment over another. Just assume we're going to have to do it.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of looking at it.
And I thought we had already reached out to PNNL to find out what the time frame would look like and how that coordination would take shape. I don't think anybody on this call did that, but I thought Carol was reaching out, if I'm not mistaken, and Eric, maybe you can, or Chuck, maybe you know.
I believe I believe there was an initial communication. I never heard back whether or not there was a response.
Okay.
Yeah, let me do a little digging right now in terms of feedback from Carol. I might have something on it, but let me check.
Sounds good. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Thanks, Chuck, for bringing that up. So the next one is number 5. Let me go to the top about C403.8. And then, John, if I need to scroll up or down, please let me know as you're going through that too.
Okay, yeah, this is good as a starting point. So this is one of the other major areas for these types of unitary or package systems, where we were looking to see if we could improve the energy efficiency and strengthen the requirements. So there's 2 types of changes here, and both are with regards to the system fan power for systems. So this would apply essentially to both constant volume and variable air volume systems, small and large. So the 2 types of changes we made, one change is to simply lower the fan power limit for these systems. So it could be either brake horsepower or related to the system static pressure. And then the second change is to expand the scope of these requirements. If you notice that the C403.8.1, the typical limit is to only that these requirements only impact systems with breakout horsepower exceeding 5 brake horsepower at design conditions, and we're expanding the scope to lower that down to 1. So this brings in a lot of the somewhat more modest sized systems that previously were not directly regulated. Systems, there's a clarifying note mainly to cover the DOS type systems. Systems that provide continuous ventilation while occupied must meet the requirements of option 2. The exceptions haven't changed here, so hospitals and laboratory systems, process type systems are not covered under this. And then individual exhaust fans with nameplate horsepower 1 or less are exempt from the requirement. So this again is based on a study that was done through other jurisdictions. So the structure of the code matches, of the proposed change matches the current IECC code for Denver, but the main difference is that the limits for both constant volume and variable air volume fan systems have been reduced somewhat. So the changes amount to, I forget the percentage, but it's on the order of 15 to 20% lower fan power for these systems. So the fan power, obviously, this is a little bit of a tricky one to try to regulate directly, since it is a design dependency as far as what kind of ductwork they have and the layout of the building and whatnot. But this was based on a study done with by others for California, where they looked at ways to reduce the fan power through ductwork layout transitions and whatnot, and they were able to find ways to equitably reduce the fan power for these buildings. This would be also a prescriptive type requirement, so it would be expected that there might be some cases where there's some, based on the building layout and zoning, that it might just be difficult to achieve these levels. And one thing to state something in terms of resiliency, at least with the kinds of rooftop units and package units and systems that I see in the field, those typically have a lifespan of 15 to 20 years, whereas the ductwork often stays in the building for quite a long time. So we want to make sure that it's being designed in a manner to minimize the static pressure as much as possible, such that the fan systems can be reduced in size where possible. The one thing we did so the table C403.8, the fan power limitation. So what we developed something that was kind of lies somewhere in between the current Denver code and then we're looking at California's Title 24 update, which was fairly aggressive. And we're kind of looking at ways to maybe kind of make something a little bit sort of not a compromise, but something that was more manageable for projects to meet. So we landed on something that's a little bit higher of a fan power allowance, yet offering still a pretty significant reduction for the so there's still two options. One is just the nameplate horsepower option 1, and there's the allowances there for constant volume and variable volume, and then the option 2 is based more on the actual brake horsepower calculation. So the actual duct layout for the building. We have different for variable volume systems. Recognize that the larger systems, are might have a different need for a different allowance than smaller systems. So based on the supply airflow of less than 2,000, which is roughly corresponding to 5 or 6 tons of a capacity.
John, can you hear us? I do not know where he was going to go with that statement. Well, I'm sure he'll join when he can, so maybe we can open it up for any discussion.
I'll provide just a real quick update on that last item in the ComCheck res check update. We did not yet get a response from PNNL, so I've asked Carol and Keith here in CPD to follow up with them on that.
Thank you, Eric.
Right off, one of my concerns with this proposal is the existing buildings equipment replacement is going to need to comply with this section. And if the existing ductwork layout doesn't support this, it's going to be very hard for design teams to meet it.
Do we want to write an exclusion to address that, but still have it for the new buildings?
Yeah, and I'd like to hear John's, because I know I've brought this up reviewing this proposal during it. But yeah, I mean, I think we could write an exclusion, but then we also need to have still set limits. So I don't know if just base code manpower limitation is okay for equipment replacement. And then for new buildings, it goes to this additional requirement, which seems kind of awkward to me to have both still available.
Is it just a matter of the duct area?
Yeah, the layout and the number of turns, etc. And then I was sort of hoping this would get proposed or be heard at more of the committee level, because I'd be curious to know on some of the engineers currently designing the high-rise buildings, if they felt like these fan power limitations would be a challenge moving air 45 stories. You know, is it possible? So I was hoping to get input from, you know, ME, IMG, IMEG, and Mark Jelinski on whether or not they felt these fan power restrictions would allow for the designs of some of the unique buildings we see here in Denver, or some of the high-rise buildings we see.
As John's back, maybe he can speak to some of that.
Yeah, so sorry, that was completely dropped off on the network side. So these requirements were designed, as I said, based on looking at some other proposals, and namely California jurisdiction, looking at some design data we have for a small but select number of projects from a leading ME designer in California, for some of which are mid to high rise buildings. So that was the intent behind this kind of separate classification for fan power requirement for systems that have higher airflow capacity, thinking that at least some of those will be used potentially in larger buildings that might have floor by floor air handlers. So the levels, these were ones that were met by the projects from the designer that we worked with, and these were actually not incredibly recent, but from a recent code cycle in California. So the idea is, yeah, certainly we want to establish a standard that can be readily met with good design, and we want the projects that can't meet these for some reason to be would be limited to somewhat of the outliers that maybe they have an unusual design layout or scoping. But yeah, the idea is with the duct design that there should be some means to reduce these limits. So and a lot of these systems also, since they provide ventilation, they run continuously. So the fan energy can really be a large component of the overall HVAC energy use. But yeah, I'd also be willing, or not willing, more than willing, I'd be interested to hear feedback on these limits and are they achievable? And also this other big change was this 5 horsepower limit has been in the codes for a long time. So basically the smaller systems aren't really covered directly by this requirement in here, as well as ASHRAE 90.1. So the intent was to lower that requirement to 1 horsepower or 1 brake horsepower to bring in more systems into the mix.
Hey, John, I'm curious why the metric changed from horsepower to brake horsepower, mostly because on smaller systems, I can hardly ever find brake horsepower ratings. It's always, it's always horsepower.
Oh. Well, I think this is because this threshold really applies not just to an individual fan, but to the whole system. So it could be, it could be a supply fan and a return fan, or a supply fan and exhaust fan. So we want to consider the fan power of the whole system. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. So for smaller systems, it might be more practical just to use the nameplate. But the idea is that certainly the nameplate's not going to correlate perfectly with the actual fan power, since it depends on the system selection and whatnot.
Yeah, I would just say if that that even this very first sentence, HVAC system having total fan system, blah blah blah. If we're looking at fan systems where we don't have or we can't find brake horsepower, immediately we have challenges. But I think if your intent can also encompass the more typical horsepower ratings for those smaller systems, that's going to be what triggers that, and whether you put it in both ways to sort of cover your intent there. The horsepower and the kilowatt ratings are what we're going to find for the smaller systems, not necessarily brake horsepower.
Right.
If that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And John, just to clarify, is that brake horsepower that I underlined, is that new to the code?
It should not be new, but it may be new here, right here in this.
Or yeah, sorry, that's what I meant, this language.
It should be defined somewhere. So so this is something, so the brake horsepower would be, depending on the design, whereas the nameplate would be, the actual fan motor that's selected.
I think in your amendment language, it should have been underlined because it's new for this bit of code, correct?
Oh, yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, just the brake is the base code language is motor nameplate horsepower.
Thank
The
you.
brake is the added.
So it sounds like we want to show these in both units then moving forward.
Right. I guess we want to Elizabeth's point, we may want to have some language or an option that gives people guidance on how to treat systems that don't have a readily available brake horsepower especially for the smaller systems.
Would that fall in an exception then? Eventually.
Yes, I think would right after it would probably fall right after the we could put it in a section, or we could put it under the main paragraph there, 403.8.
Yeah, I think if the intent is to include those smaller systems, then you want to include metrics that would encompass them, which is probably going to be horsepower and or kilowatt.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not a exclusion, so to say, but to, just add the metric to include them, I think is your intent, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I guess in looking at the fee and power limitation, we've addressed the metrics at the top and how they should be incorporated. I imagine that means this table would need to be updated as well to include those metrics. But in terms of the values here, is that something we, are there any questions or discussion on these?
I still think just the values are based, or my concern is I want to make sure that the engineering teams in Denver currently designing high-rise buildings feel that these limits are achievable with good design. And that's why I sort of think that this is one of those proposals that in the committee hearing would be a good place to hear it. Maybe clean it up here and hear it in the committee hearing if there's time, because this is definitely one that'll affect some things. Of course, it is just prescriptive, correct?
Yes, that's right. But you certainly want to make it reasonably strong requirement without being so difficult that most projects can't meet it. That's not the intent either. So, but the premise of this is that with modern design, that most buildings can meet or easily meet the current requirements. So there's a little bit of room for improvement.
John, how do you think what would you recommend tackling existing buildings, like equipment replacements?
Well, I think existing one is, yeah, I mean, this really covers new construction. So existing is kind of another animal. So unless it depends if there's I worked on projects where they're just doing an EOL end of life replacement for the unit, just dropping a new unit on. So they're obviously not going to be able to do anything there. Other projects where they do a remodel where they change the ductwork or layout significantly. So that kind of alteration potentially something could be done, but I haven't really, that hasn't been the focus of this proposal, I guess. And lastly, we do want to consider accommodations for future design requirements, such as, for example, higher levels of filtration. If that comes in, if you have a higher MERV filtration comes down the line, you want to be able to accommodate that. But yeah, I haven't really unfortunately, I haven't really focused too much on the existing buildings for this one.
Yeah, it just the only concern I have is typically equipment replacement, existing buildings with small remodels. They use the prescriptive path, so they would, and the existing portion of our code requires compliance with section C4 or C403, which encompasses this. So they would be required to meet this. And I agree that, as you said, if there's a new system with all new ductwork, then they should be able to meet this and should meet this. But if it's an existing system where they're just pulling a piece of equipment and dropping a new piece of equipment, With no ductwork changes, that could be a challenge.
Right, and I would have to check, because I know, like here, we have a lot of duct leakage testing requirements in some cases, but if that component isn't being touched, then those requirements aren't triggered. So
Yeah.
we would want to make that clear in this case.
So it sounds like we would need to add language to clarify what applies to the existing buildings.
Yes, yes.
I feel like we might have covered this proposal, unless there's other items. It sounds like, we'll need to revisit this one and bring this one back. Is there any other items of discussion for it? In general, I guess, if, when these are all modified, I know it's hard to say without seeing on a screen, but do we all feel like this would be something to move forward then, or would someone disagree that we shouldn't move it forward?
I think it's a great idea to have this one presented at the hearing in case mechanical design community has issues with it, because maybe there's things that we haven't thought of.
Yep.
I'm not a mechanical designer.
Well, it's just the fear of unintended consequences. So I'd love to have the solid mechanical engineers on the code committee hear this one.
Hey, quick question on that. Are we able to inquire of folks that are not on the committee? I'm just thinking of, somebody that's working on a 430-foot office building right now, that it'd be nice to run this question by them, but is that sort of out of bounds if they're not part of this committee? And in fact, they're in Chicago.
No.
Absolutely not.
Okay, cool.
Certainly welcome that. I mean, even in the formal code committees, we always have the public, option for people to speak on behalf too.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, like Mark Jelensky's not part of the IECC committee, but he's contributed quite a bit to the discussions for sure.
Great. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Number 39. LPD.
Okay, great. So this one involves interior lighting power, and the approach taken here, it's a little more, what's the word? It's a little more easy to follow the logic on the values probably for this one than the one we just looked at. Although the last one, I think there is certainly a basis for it. But this one, basically, we took the lighting power density values for the space by space or the building area method. And what we did was we, where appropriate or where possible, we made a recommendation to lower those values to the levels set currently in the IGCC. So the reduction won't be an exact 5% or 10% drop across the board, but it's roughly a 10, 12, 14% reduction in lighting power allowance for these space types. So we've got everything here from dining facility, dormitory. Some of them, such as office, has been unchanged, but a lot of these have been reduced slightly. I will point out one, not to shoot myself in the foot, but my lighting knowledge of this particular space is limited, but there were some discussions about the parking garage in particular, going from, I think it's 0.16 to 0.12, that some people thought, there was one commenter, I think at one point thought that might be tricky to meet. Just throwing that out there. So we can look at any of these in particular. But basically the approach was to just simply take the values for IGCC for the, I guess that's the whole, I'm sorry, this is the whole building. Can you scroll back up, Courtney? I might have got this wrong. Sorry, so the first table we're looking at is the building area method. So this is the whole building approach. So this is projects where they would just comply with that straight lighting power for the whole building. Whereas most projects, if you scroll down again, thank you. So the space by space method is where each space is evaluated individually. So here's another area where we lowered the value somewhat. So in some cases, there's a very minor reduction. In some couple cases more significant. But these, again, the values essentially align with IGCC. Now, if you scroll a little farther down where it talks about the Denver Green Code, I wanted to point out something. That's good. Thank you. Since we're lowering this is a case where there was a requirement where the interior lighting power shall be less than 70% of the interior lighting power allowance calculated with the tables above. So significant reduction. So what we did was it looks like we're backing off on the requirement, but we changed this from 70 to 75%. And this is precisely because the values are for the base code are being made significantly more stringent, such that even with a 25% reduction, you're getting a really low lighting power in some cases. And we thought that in some cases, the 70% level or threshold would be difficult to meet. Or another way of putting it is that even with raising that comparative threshold from 70% to 75%, we're still seeing a reduction in lighting power requirements or limits for the DGC. So if it seems like we're sliding on this one, it's not exactly the case because we're making the base code significantly more stringent. So any comments, questions on this one, the approach, the stringency?
John, do you recall any that weren't in line with IGCC that you adopted in this table?
So as one of my colleagues was working on this with me, I think these should be in line with IGCC. To my knowledge, I would have to look carefully to confirm that 100%, but that's certainly the intent.
Thank you.
I guess I'll share my opinion to start with. We had a similar proposal for reduced lighting power densities in the last code cycle, and it didn't pass. And the reason for that is as soon as we mandate or lower the base code, we remove the potential to rebate things. And while I think most of these are achievable with current designs, if you put it in the base code, you take away Excel's ability to provide rebates. If you keep the lighting reduction in C406 and C407, then we have not taken away that rebate potential. So I would strongly encourage you just to take this out of the base code and keep the stringency in the compliance options. Because yes, maybe this will be used for all types of buildings, and yes, people will use the lighting check mark in C406 and C407, but that allows us to keep the rebates in place and just to help to fund everything.
So I do want to speak to that a little bit, Elizabeth. Tom, Jan, and myself met with, I believe his name was Rob Buchanan at Excel, to review some of those rebate discussions that we had in the last code committee. And He was saying that, and we can get him to come into these meetings to clarify some more, but he was saying that if Sal's not going to change their requirements based on one code, if Denver does something differently, they're not going to change that. It's based on the 2021 IECC. So if we adopt something more stringent, we're not going to be losing rebates because of that.
You will lose rebates. Well, this is Aaron Hessling from Excel Energy. Everything is based off of, like, right now, our new construction lighting program, and everything is based off of the current code in 2018 IECC. So if you lower all of these LPD values, rebate will just turn it down.
And we had the same discussion. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. We had the same discussion when we adopted the 2018 IECC, and the like, you know, the EDA program, for example, you know, if there's local amendments that mandate something, it's not eligible for rebates. If it's an option in C406 or an option in C407, then it's not mandated and it's eligible for rebates. And that's the trick. That's really the key. So I think, you know, we can, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Courtney.
I was just saying my discussion with Rob, I guess, is more on the residential side. So I do acknowledge that. And that would be, I guess, a separate conversation about what we had before is a little different than where we landed at the code committees.
The residential side is a lot different too from the commercial, is where they incentivize the builders, not the actual customers for the most part. So these are decreasing the things for the actual customers and stuff too. So something to keep in mind between the difference.
Yeah, so I personally don't have issues with the targets, but I would build them into our other compliance options rather than putting them here. The other discussion that we had in the last code cycle for these targets is it does make it difficult for designers to try to keep multiple lighting power densities in their heads. If it's a C406 thing and it's in ComCheck and it's just like how it is right now, that's what, you know, the community's used to. It's, you know, check the box to be 30% more stringent in your C406 option. ComCheck already does that for us for the 2019 Denver building code. So I'd encourage that we just continue that option rather than taking this other track, because everyone's used to it now.
Elizabeth, I appreciate your feedback on this. Can we talk about what disadvantages would be to doing that, just in terms of the pursuit of this particular pathway, maybe?
Disadvantages of accepting this proposal, you mean?
No, of changing it to an option. Or
Sure.
maybe keeping it an option.
Honestly, I can't think of any disadvantages. Options are great. I mean, that leaves the door open, you know, like John, as you mentioned, if anybody's got issues with the parking garage target, for example, oh, it's optional. You don't have to use this pathway. You can go improve your envelope and do other marvelous things. But by keeping things optional, it becomes very hard to to argue with it. It's also a nice continuity from the current code. I would probably struggle to think of a disadvantage, but I'll think about that.
Yeah, I guess I would say, you know, I guess it depends. Do people need incentives to install these types of lighting systems that would be required here? You know, if the answer is yes, then I think Elizabeth is correct. But if we're just giving people credit or rebates for things that they would do anyways, you know, then that's something else. And I mean, I guess, you know, there's obviously benefits and advantages to flexibility, but you know, would there be greater level of energy savings if it were made a requirement? So That's just, something, I know lighting is one of those type topics that always gets picked on. Oh, there's more efficient products, and we just keep lowering it. So we don't want to arbitrarily make it so low that it's difficult to meet, too difficult to meet. But that is one thing is would we be incentivizing to rebate something that is already standard practice?
It's not. Having it be optional is really nice. And I can think of a lot of spaces and even building types like, core and shell buildings where we don't have lighting. Either we have to implement a tenant agreement or, do something that's going to restrict a future tenant. It gets really complicated in that sense. Senior housing facilities where not all space types are addressed for those who need higher light levels will rarely take the lighting savings track. They'll find savings elsewhere. But to your question as to whether we would still achieve the savings that are the goal of this, that would be how we would build it into, whatever those final metrics are for C406 and C407, that yes, that's where the tuning comes into play. The savings will happen. And by leaving it as an option, yeah, maybe 95% of projects would choose, the lighting savings and go that route. But it leaves the door open for the 5% who can find a better way or a different way or what have you. But the savings will happen in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, well, that is a good point with C406. I haven't really been thinking about as much, which if you structure it such that most projects would need to get that or something similar, if you're still achieving the same target, then that makes sense from that perspective. And
that's exactly, John. And that's why in the last code cycle, the unmodified C406 for the 2018 code said, okay, 10% lighting power density reduction. Well, that's just too easy. So the amendment changed that to 30%. And now you have to try a little harder. So, and that's good. So it did increase the savings, and yeah, most projects still used that option, but not all.
I would be open to C406 path. I would just want to make sure we're calibrating it in a way where these points aren't somehow the easiest ones to get over other, really good savings, such as like electric space heating or water heating or other efficiency levels. And I think that's where it comes down to the calibration.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, yeah, and it really might, if it were put in C406, it might, since the points roughly correlate to savings, energy savings, if projects are able to get a reasonable amount of savings that way, then it would just kind of keep that target strong, that credit point total up. So I'm fine either way. I mean, I'm fine with this approach, kind of spelling out the requirements by space, but I'll leave that to I have to leave it to the committee. I don't have a choice, but I was gonna say, but I'm fine, leaving it to the group to make that decision.
Well, and I really like giving away Excel's money. So I would, I think you'll get a more positive response if it becomes an option than if it's mandated. And I don't see a downside to doing it that way. You'll still meet the intent of this, but keep it in a positive way that benefits folks better.
I agree. I would suggest we move forward in that direction. Would anyone like to disagree, or do we have a general agreement to move forward with this as an option, but with the numerical values as indicated?
And I would say, in the C406, rather than getting to this detail, because we don't need it, just as our current building code is, it's just a percentage. That leaves it open to the designers to do a whole building or do space by space, but we already have that built into our current ComCheck, so people are used to it. So I wouldn't go, I mean, I think this much detail is just not needed. Just make it a simple percentage in C406. And then C407, you know, you'll be tuning the whatever methodology and savings metric we're using, we'll have that as our baseline.
That sounds good. Thanks everyone for the discussion on this. I think we have good direction moving forward for this proposal. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which is number 33. John, can you see this one all right?
It's coming up now. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
So-
I didn't realize it was so
Great,
delayed.
great. Okay. Yeah, I see it. Thanks. Okay, so that's probably a good segue to this one, the last discussion, because this one is in C406. So this is a dedicated outside air system, and really this strengthens or adds the requirements to get credit for a dedicated outside air system, or referred to as a DOAS system. So again, this relies on work done other jurisdictions. Certainly, as with other measures, your savings will vary, as they say. So, but the concept is the same, that we want to make sure that the DOAS systems that are being installed meet certain minimum criteria. So I'll just go through them here. One is including energy recovery with a minimum energy recovery, and this is sensible in the Denver climate, of at least 60% at design conditions, according to the ASHRAE ratings. The system shall include an energy recovery bypass when ventilation conditions are suitable for direct air delivery without heat recovery. So we want to be able to make sure, you know, if it's 60, 70 degrees outside, that the energy recovery system, which has a pressure drop and subsequent increase in fan energy, can be bypassed. The second, DOAS shall disable heating and cooling. Shall disable heating and employ bypass as needed to maintain a 60-degree or cooler supply air temperature when the majority of zones served by DOAS require cooling. So some DOAS systems might just serve one space or be dumping air into a common space, but others may be serving multiple systems. So we want to make sure that the DOAS isn't creating any unnecessary heating load by pushing air that's too cold for the space that might increase the heating load on the building. Heating cooling equipment for heating cooling circulation pumps and series terminal units shall cycle off, and terminal unit primary cooling shall be shut off when there's no call for heating and cooling. And finally, DOAS systems with a design airflow of at least 1,000 CFM shall include a variable speed drive. And this is mainly used for these systems, even though they're primarily constant volume systems. Variable speed drives are commonly put on these systems for system balancing and commissioning. They want to be able to be tuned to provide the correct airflow once they're installed in the field. If you scroll down a little bit towards the table, I don't recall whether I have every table in here, but recall for the for the energy credits. So there'll be a kind of a matrix of credit points. Apologize for the formatting here. There'll be a matrix of credit points available for each building type. This is the business or mercantile. So if you, actually, if you go up a little bit, Courtney, right there, yeah. Sorry, down a little bit. C406 dots there, yeah. So the dedicated these credit points would be calibrated probably for, and I guess I have to apologize again because I thought we had cleaned up these tables to be to show just Denver's climate, but they seem to show all the climates. I'm not sure why that is, but this would basically be for Denver's climate, we'd have a specific number of credit points available for dedicated outside air systems. And then there'd be a specific total number of credit points that would be available for each building type. Sorry, I thought we had cleaned this up on our side to where we had the removed all the other climates. You're probably not as concerned about Miami for what their DOS is doing there. So the primary goal of this proposal is to make some adjustments for a DOS credit to make sure that the DOS system is designed as intended, and then to finally to calibrate the number of credit points. And with that, I'll take any questions, comments.
So John, the points here that we're seeing that would just be for Denver specific credit. Those points that are seen here are, I would say, still flexible depending on the calibration of the larger C406 proposal, correct? Like these are example credits, but not like if we were to move forward with this, we would still know that these points could be adjusted.
Yes, so we would double check, like I said with the other one, if we did the lighting, the credits should roughly correlate to each point is roughly a 0.25% reduction in energy use, and obviously that's going to vary building to building somewhat, but it's meant to be close enough first order approach that the number of points will be roughly proportional to the energy benefits. So there may be some buildings types may have a higher number of points than others based on the expected or modeled credit. and usually these credit points would be done with a set of energy models. There's probably other ways to do it, but so we'd figure out or I think it might be Sean in this case, but someone would figure out the energy savings that would be attributed to each of these C406 measures for each building type.
Right, so I think the thing to maybe discuss now is if it makes sense for this to make it into the framework of C406, just like we did for the LPDs. Knowing the calibration upcoming.
Right. So just to double clarify, so this is a credit. So I know there's at least one other jurisdiction I know that has made these types of systems required in some cases. So we're not going that far for this one, but we are giving a credit points available for it. As a good design system, and can potentially energy saving system on the fan side, as well as being a good, generally good system for ventilation.
Are there discussion points or those that disagree that this should be moved in to be considered in the C406 package?
Yeah, it's kind of already there. I think the modifications add some good design practice standards that have been left out of the current 2021 IECC. I think that's how the systems should be designed when this option is utilized. So I like it. The points calibration? I know that's kind of a big global overreaching question, so I presume that that's going to be sort of held to the end once everything else goes in, right?
Yes.
So I think, John, you really just added this text here as far as some design and control standards, right?
That's right. That's pretty much it. So.
Yeah, I think most systems do this. Like whenever we see a DOAS, it pretty much does this most of the time, or at least most of these, or they should. So it seems like it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, not all have the bypass, I think, but yeah, most should have most of these.
Yeah, I think it's good.
I think on the controls, I've seen it sometimes where they let the supply air temperature get a little bit on the cool side, which can be, you know, not ideal from an energy standpoint. But.
All right. So it's down, or Chuck, did you have something to add?
No, I was just going to agree with
Okay.
John and Elizabeth. This looks like a good one.
Sounds good. So it sounds like we all are in agreement that this should be moved forward as part of the C406 package, calibrating at a later point, you know, and taking John's, the way he structured his points into consideration as we start to calibrate those. So I'm going to move on to the next one, number 26. Unregulated energy.
Okay, is this the top of it, Courtney? Oh, I guess it is. Okay. I think there were a couple changes made here. So this one, and this one's probably a good point of discussion as far as if it's able to make it into the code and how. So this is a Denver Green Code proposal, and what we're really trying to do is address unregulated energy use. So you know, things like plug loads, appliances, process loads, elevators, things that are not strictly regulated in terms of energy from the building perspective, but that make a big can have a big impact. So the first one was an adjustment or addition to the existing Energy Star requirements that are called out for in the DGC. And the intent here is we reviewed a number of the different appliance standards, and we found that there were a few here, clothes washers, dishwashers, and refrigerators, that have a Energy Star most efficient rating. So this is relying or leveraging work that Energy Star does. And we identified ones that have, number one, not only had a most efficient rating, but two, ones that have very good market penetration. And I can't, it's been a while since I've looked at this, so I don't recall the exact numbers, but for types of appliances that have a very, very high, you know, 30, 50, 70% market penetration for Energy Star already, you know, in the marketplace. So the addition here is to make those requirements be the most efficient requirements. It's kind of a very intuitively clear label, but it's just another tier of efficiency that Energy Star sets. So there are products available for those types of equipment. You scroll down a little bit. Okay, so stop there, please. Thank you. So the next one is energy monitoring, excuse me. And this one lowers, or maybe it's a new requirement. I thought it just lowered the requirement. But anyways, we're setting a requirement for new buildings with gross condition floor area of 10,000 square foot or larger to be equipped to monitor and record energy consumption data and compliance with the sections in C405. So this is really strengthening and extending the energy monitoring requirements for these smaller buildings. Some of you that have worked in smaller standalone buildings know that their bandwidth and abilities to monitor and troubleshoot their systems are quite limited at times. So it's important for these types of smaller buildings to have those infrastructure and capabilities to do that monitoring as well. And then if you scroll down a little bit towards disaggregation, this is just adding a little bit more detail to require disaggregation of end uses, such that plug loads, appliances rated less than 25 kVA are monitored, shall be separately monitored, and that buildings with service greater than 250 kVA, the plug load measurements shall be separated or disaggregated by floor type or area. And this is just, again, for, I guess, well, this is not, well, it's related to plug loads, but it's also related to monitoring feedback. It kind of makes a step, if you will, towards, you know, an outcome-based code where you're enabling at least a better feedback loop to get data on what's happening in the building, such that the performance can be maintained over its life. And that's basically it for this one. I don't recall if there's anything of note with the supporting information here, but I'll leave it there. And as far as any comments or questions.
I'll admit to not knowing the green code probably as well as I should. So I'll try to just do little comments. I think Linda's on the line though, and I think she may have more depth of knowledge for green code stuff. I know a little bit about Energy Star appliances. There are some limitations there when there's a certain model or style that's needed that is not available in Energy Star. Obviously, those kinds of things change all the time. Is there a way to allow some flexibility there? And specifically, like when we have multifamily ADA units, there is a certain type of combo washer dryer where it's one unit. You can wash your clothes, you can dry your clothes. It's accessible. It's beautiful. There is no Energy Star option for that piece of equipment. So like in affordable housing projects, for example, which normally have an Energy Star requirement, I have an exception for that piece of equipment. Is that the kind of thing that would be workable in this type of regulation? And is it there already and I'm just not seeing it because there's a lot of words here?
Well, I would hope it would. I mean, I think the scope of this was more geared towards commercial, even though some of these are also residential type appliances. Like, for example, and maybe this itself should be clarified, but for example, like, well, I guess there is residential dishwashers. Yeah, I think the certainly if there's a product that doesn't fall under that categorization for Energy Star or Energy Star most efficient, there should be some sort of exception or exemption for it, I think.
So can that, I don't know, can that be built in somewhere, somehow? And it's tricky because the lists change pretty frequently. Like for a while, I couldn't find any stacked washer dryers that were Energy Star rated, and now I can. But this will apply to all of our multifamily because they technically fall under the commercial code. So be thinking of it from a residential standpoint. and residential scale appliances. Unless you're intending to exclude multifamily, but I don't think you are, correct?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean maybe the code locally here, the it's kind of weird, but the residential dwelling units are kind of covered within the residential code, even though the building's a multifamily. So, but in this case, no, I think it's fine to have those exemptions. Personally, I would have to look to see if there's I'm not super familiar with all of the reasons where you would need that exception, but I don't know if some kind of ADA type language covers everything. But I think that would be.
Yeah, well, we do pay a lot of attention to Energy Star labels because that's if I'm doing an affordable project and it's got to be energy enterprise green communities, that's a mandate. But there's a basically enterprise allows some flexibility. So if I'm doing an affordable project, I just have to show that there is no Energy Star option available in this washer dryer unit that just doesn't exist. So I don't know if you want to put in some language about, and this doesn't necessarily have to be ADA per se, but if there's a product that does not have an Energy Star option, can there be an exception? I think there's, and then we'll have to be a little careful about that because there are some refrigerator styles also that do not have an Energy Star option. So the language will have to be careful. Like if I'm doing my affordable project and there's refrigerators in a certain style that don't have an Energy Star option, I'm not allowed to use those because I can get a refrigerator in a different style that is. Just so you know, it's those French door ones with the bottom pull-out freezers. No Energy Star options for those yet. But so I have to choose a different kind of refrigerator. But I can find a refrigerator. But I cannot find this particular washer dryer combo unit in the same size. There is no Energy Star option for that particular product style, but it would still fall under this code language. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Elizabeth, I agree with you on the like where you just cannot buy like for an ADA one. I would be, since it's the Denver Green Code, asking people to maybe change their type of refrigerator to me doesn't seem like
I agree. That's exactly what I was trying to say, Courtney, is that yes, just because there isn't a French door refrigerator that's Energy Star doesn't mean you get to use that.
Yeah.
So the language should be, if I'd have to look at see what it is, but if there is a product type that I don't know what the words are. That's the one that I can think of is that when I'm trying to find stacked or combo units in a particular size, like a small size, for example. And for a while, like I had issues finding the half-size dishwashers in Energy Star for like compact units. And now some of those are available, but this is just the kind of thing that changes constantly. So to write the words in a way that I think exactly as you just said, Courtney, to, that you can get a better refrigerator in the same dimensions that still keeps your food cold, right? It might not be as pretty. It might not be stainless steel, but you can find one. But in this washer dryer combo unit, I cannot find one in that size that, fits the space. So I'm not sure what the words are there, but I think we're saying the same thing.
Interesting to see what the enterprise green communities language is, and I can look that up as well. See if there's something we can use from there.
Yeah, I have to write a specific waiver for that. They don't have language for it, but it's in my template. It's a waiver that whenever I have that product, I know I can submit it, and they're going to be okay with it. So there's precedence there, but I wouldn't try to make the big French door refrigerator fly because that's I don't think that meets the intent, right?
Hi, gang. It's Linda. Towards the bottom of this, there is a requirement on KW per 5,000 square feet. Here we go. You're getting there. It's the aggregation of end uses. So I think A is for plug load disaggregation is getting to each server room, which is fine. Denver Green Code, if you want to individually measure your server rooms, okay. Just want to be sure that, you know, that seems onerous for code, but just fine for Denver Green Code if that's what you're committed to.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that does seem kind of onerous to me. We might need to think about whether an exception is needed for that, or the level of. Well, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I guess in an area of 5,000 square feet, you could have a pretty large load if it's an actual data center. So it might not be too bad a thing to have that monitoring. I mean, you could have one said 100, something like you know, a very large computer load in that space.
I don't need to edit language, just wanted to point that out. So that was my comment.
Any further items of discussion? It sounds like we're in agreement with keeping it as written and then adding language in to clarify for those that don't have the actual products and the size you need available, with more clarifying language there. If this would be good to move forward. Anyone disagree with that? I feel like we're good.
I guess my only question is, do we want to consider adjusting the language on the provision that Linda mentioned? Because it doesn't seem like it would make sense in base code, or do we think we leave it in here? I mean, the intent of things in the Denver Green Code is to encourage what we want so that we can ultimately get to a point of requiring things. So do we want to adjust that, or do we just want to leave it where it is?
I think it's good to leave where it is. I think if it made it into base code, maybe then we introduce a minimum square footage, so that if your area is 1,000 square feet or less, maybe that is what gets incorporated into a base code. But I feel like in the Denver Green Code, it could live as is, or live as written.
Okay.
I mean, I'm open to that discussion too. Linda brought up a good point.
If we leave it in there, does anybody have an objection to just understanding that we would have to talk about it again if it gets targeted to move to mandatory?
I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
All right. This one looks like it's good with the added language here. And let's see, we have maybe enough time to visit the proposal. So this is 95, also in the Denver Green Code.
Okay, yeah, so looking at this one, I think this one may be a result of work that was done concurrently with Sean's work and others, because, well, let me go through it and see. This one is for minimum HVAC equipment performance ratings, primarily for cooling equipment. So if you'll scroll down a little bit to the next section, thanks. This was designed as a green code. Again, this is green code requirement to require higher efficiency equipment for the green code as a requirement. So there's specific types of equipment pulled out. This mainly focuses on packaged equipment as opposed to central chillers or other types of equipment. So I'll just go through this quickly and then make a comment. The first one is air conditioners typically packaged, but air cooled would have a higher minimum rated EER of 12.6 and an IEER, which is integrated energy efficiency ratio. For those more familiar with residential equipment, it's kind of analogous to the SEER rating for smaller equipment. This would require a higher rating for these equipment. So the IEER, which is an annualized type rating, it really is more of a measure of how well the equipment performs over the year rather than at a specific design condition. B, again, I guess this is at least, not sure what the difference is here. Oh, pardon me, second. So the second one also covers a similar type package equipment. I think I should say at least 135,000 BTUs. It requires a minimum full load and part load efficiency rating. And then the last one, which is option C, this regards equipment with capacity 65,000 BTUs or less. So that's roughly 5 tons of cooling capacity. Shall have a minimum SEER 2. The SEER 2 is a new AHRI rating similar to the SEER. A minimum SEER 2 rating of 16.5 and a minimum full load rating of 13. So these are somewhat improvements over the minimum federal efficiency requirements. Having looked at this and having thought about the other kind of measures we were having with the C406, I think there is significant overlap between this proposal and some of the cooling efficiency credits. So some of the cooling efficiency credits, if we're able to get more credit points for higher cooling efficiency through the credit point system, it would kind of achieve a similar purpose that this proposal achieves. This one was developed in concurrently with that proposal. But the idea, anyways, the quick elevator pitch or the premise of why this is important and why it's needed is the base code itself, through federal preemption, typically cannot specify or mandate higher efficiency equipment than the federal minimums. The other jurisdictions have tried and failed. There's a legal issue with that. Whereas a lot of these higher efficiency equipment are out there. They're not specified as frequently as they could be, in my opinion, partly because the performance models don't have a very good model of equipment performance for these types of equipment and how they perform. So they may not have a really accurate estimate of a savings for a building project. So by actually requiring it for a green code, you can you can push or incentivize higher efficiency units, ideally get them specified more frequently, which would have a feedback loop to manufacturing, to lower manufacturing costs to where the incremental costs are even lower than they are today. So that's the pitch, but having looked at this and thinking about it in the context of C406, I'm wondering what the group thinks as far as having performance ratings as a DGC requirement versus having higher efficiency ratings as an available credit point for both C406 and the Green Code.
Yeah, you beat me to it, John. I know this is the Green Code, but if it's the goal for this to eventually move into the Denver Code, we have the same challenge as the conversation we had around lighting. If you mandate it, you take away the opportunity to incentivize it. It's also really, really restricts the amount of equipment options that are out there. So I will always support having things be built into C406 or C407 and allowing people to figure out what's going to be the best fit for the project, and then to preserve those Excel incentive programs to help literally incentivize that. Because when it makes sense and you've got the rebate options, that will always improve the cost effectiveness.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I do hear what you're saying on that. I see provisions, and maybe this is just me, but I see provisions in Denver Green Code, kind of like our previous proposal we talked about, still being able to be edited before it moves into base code. So although this would be, you know, if we're looking at it as written and it makes it in, if because it's in the Denver Green Code, I don't see an issue with Excel rebates. And then if it moves into the base code, I feel like there is that flexibility there to adjust as it moves forward, but introducing these efficiency levels in Denver Green Code to me makes sense. And then maybe those become options in base code, like C406 or something like that.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, you're good, Christy, go.
I was just going to layer on to that I'm the one who is saying that the intent is that they would move to base code, but the other intent of the Denver Green Code is to encourage what we want to see and to help shift the market and to make things more available and familiar in Denver, even if those edits, like Courtney mentioned, do have to happen before something goes to base code. So I wouldn't want to prevent something from being put into the Denver Green Code that could help us to evolve the market and support better overall practices through the building stock.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. I think the key just to kind of protect the community is always, you know, anytime you look to write something, you'll always increase the flexibility and preserve and protect those rebates if there's a way to keep things optional. And you know, as things go towards the overreaching goal, you know, as long as that Denver Green Code is still optional, then we've achieved both. It's when, you know, exactly as you say, Christy, as it sort of morphs into the Denver Code that we just want to be cognizant of that and not forget that.
Right. I don't think we actually could take this language and put it into base code because of the federal preemption too. So there would be that necessary modification anyway.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Right. So yeah. So this one, you know, unfortunately, yeah, this one was done kind of working concurrently and separately with others, and the credit type system in C406 could be a really good place for this. I can tell you, having worked on HVAC side for a while, that in these cases, I was designing these levels intentionally to be those that are much more efficient, but are not top of the line. You know, this is looking at the HRI product directory. For example, for the equipment listed in bullet point C, you know, SEER 16.5. I forget how that SEER 2 correlates exactly to SEER, but there's equipment today you can get with SEER 19, SEER 21, the ones that have the inverters. So the idea is precisely with this is as opposed to kind of, if you will, kind of blending it in with the other credits. I guess I'll make a minor pitch for this, is that if whether it's this or something else, if we want to push something, having a requirement can potentially, nudge the market a little bit to say, hey, okay, yeah, we can do this this type of equipment or this measure, and then that measure gets more traction, and then at least in the ideal sense, it has a feedback loop where it can change production. Because I can tell you one part of the increased cost for these systems are simply the fact that they don't make a lot. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. They have a production line, and it's not part of their main production line. The component cost is incrementally is not that big, but the kind of the retooling the line to meet the needs of the higher efficiency equipment is another factor in it. So, and these aren't like, these aren't 2 times multipliers for these types of equipment, or anything like that. It might be, 15 to 30% markup or something like that, or not markup, but incremental cost for this type of high efficiency equipment.
I guess what I would throw in there on that is it's going to be, so looking at the Denver Green Code, if you're following the Denver Green Code pilot program, the as written code, that's a small handful of projects which won't move the market. If we're looking at the other use of the Denver Green Code, which is the limited mandatory use, it's optional whether we make it a standalone provision or we put it into C406, because you get to choose some number of things from each chapter, or if you go to C406, you choose your measures. So for me, I don't feel strongly one way or the other on where it lives. I
do want to acknowledge it is 1 o'clock. I don't want to keep anyone later. I don't know if we found a solution for this one. I think there's a lot of discussion here.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, I guess if I had a vote, which I don't, but it might be tempting to go with the C406 for this, as far as but making sure we can give people sufficient credit for for the moderately high efficiency, and then even more credit for top of the line systems. Because
would tend to agree.
I have to jump off, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like we just need to have more people to continue this discussion, but thank you all for joining today. I think we made some good progress here. And John, we can follow up on this one internally too.
Bye.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Very informative.